and we are going to get started. Hopefully, Assemblymember Bonta will be joining us shortly. So, welcome to the state of cannabis. It's been an exhausting week, but the good news is cannabis is winning big, and drugs, apparently. So, what does that mean to our industry and to our community? I'm excited about the conversation we're about to have because I've assembled some of the brightest and most influential minds in the space. Kat Packer had a last minute conflict, but she's organizing a national regulator social equity roundtable for December's State of Cannabis. So stay tuned for that. I've invited Adam Smith to take her place because he has some really exciting thoughts to share with us. So let's get started. There he is. Okay, here comes Assemblymember Bonta. He's gonna lead our discussion today so I can do the back end stuff. Actually, while we're waiting for him, Congressman Correa, can you tell us your analysis of what the heck just happened or is still happening? You need to unmute.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
First of all, it's an honor to be with all of you today. Watching democracy unfold in this great United States of America. My message to one and all is give democracy a chance, let the process unfold. This is what makes America so different from other countries, that we've had changes in power, peaceful changes, according to the will of the voters. Given the will of the voters, we saw a lot of legislation throughout the country pass in favor of cannabis policy. And that's good news, because what it's telling us is that cannabis has reached a point that it is acceptable based on the facts that we know, as opposed to historically the misinformation that has been fed to Americans over the decades, the so-called war on drugs. And this is good news, because what it means is we can begin to move forward and begin to unlock the secrets behind the medical aspects, medical benefits of cannabis, as well as the recreational uses that we can have. I have personally moved legislation in Congress. I've been advocating for legislation to do research into cannabis. All of us know cannabis is good for many things. What we want to know is how many other benefits does cannabis have medically, and what is cannabis not really good for? And then, of course, all of us have to discuss the issues of being responsible cannabis consumers. Don't medicate and drive, keep it away from the kids, and make sure we have responsible public policy. With that being said, it'll be interesting to see what percentage of the United States population will now live under a jurisdiction, state of course, where cannabis is legal one way or the other. And I'm hoping this development sends a signal to Washington, because we're still unsure as to who will be the next president of the United States. Is it going to be a re-election or a new president, number 46? And that will have implications for cannabis. As you know, when President Trump assumed the presidency, he repudiated the Cole Memo. And as you remember, the Cole Memo was essentially a statement that said, as long as there was a viable regulatory framework at the state level, the federal government would not use federal resources to enforce federal law. That was in the Obama administration, the Cole Memo. And of course, the Trump administration canceled or repudiated that memo. Thinking if Biden wins, we can probably expect to see, at the minimum, a reinstatement of the Cole Memo, and maybe some other executive orders that the president can move on that will begin to positively affect the legislative framework under which cannabis is affected or worked on at the federal level. We have the legislative, not executive, but legislative level, the MORE Act, which is Jerry Nadler's bill that, would essentially legalize cannabis. That bill was supposed to be up for a vote on the House floor a few weeks ago. We decided to hold it while the elections were taking place. Now that the elections are done, I fully expect the MORE Act, Jerry Nadler's bill, to be up for a vote on the House of Representatives. From there, it's got to go to the Senate. And also, it looks like the Senate, I should say, the Senate will be possibly under Mr. McConnell's control, Republican control. If that's the case, the chances of the MORE Act moving through the Senate to the president's desk are probably not good. But of course, we're talking about some horse trading going on at the very high level. If the Senate changes hands, if it becomes democratically controlled, then I can see a pathway for the MORE Act to move through the Senate and reach the president's desk. So conclusion is a lot of iffies, a lot of questions that a lot of them should be solved in the next few days, if not in the next couple of weeks. It'll depend, of course, who ends up being president, and number two, what the Senate does. Right now, it looks like I'd say the stronger bet is it'll probably remain in Republican hands. Let me conclude by saying, with that being said, the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak, in terms of cannabis policy. We need to continue to push forward. Don't assume that we will make progress automatically. We have to take every battle and keep pushing hard, because our fellow Americans, our constituents, are depending on you and us to move ahead good public policy for the United States. We've had 70 years of the war on drugs, and that war on drugs has been characterized by criminalizing drug use. We should have been making it a medical issue, where if you're a heroin user, if you're addicted to other substances, to alcohol, you go to the hospital, you go get treatment, you don't go to jail. And I think cannabis policy fits along that new way of thinking. We've got to get there. Our country depends on it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Hey, I hope you can stick around for a minute.
I will.
Okay, good, because we're going to have Assembly Member Bonta speak to us next, and then we've got a brilliant scientist that's going to give us the breakdown on the psychedelic world, and then I've got somebody that I want both of you, you and Assembly Member Bonta, to hear about interstate commerce and this brilliant plan. So let's turn the spotlight over to Assembly Member Bonta.
Hi, Susan, and hey, Lou, good to see you.
Senor Bonta, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well, except for that deep anxiety that we all have about who our next president is going to be. So that aside, I'm doing great. But thanks for your leadership, Lou. Always good to see you. Thanks again, Susan, and a wonderful panel. I'm looking forward to hearing from everybody and for a really important discussion. Maybe I'll just share a few reflections as the Congress member did, maybe with a focus on the states. And California in particular. I agree with Congressmember Correa's views of what a Biden-Harris administration could mean, the restoration of things like the Cole memo, the ability to use executive power. I think without the U.S. Senate, we definitely have an obstacle there that could be unovercomable, given Mr. McConnell's view of cannabis, even with a receptive president and a Democratic House. But you look at the state action across the nation, and states are regularly approving both medical and adult use cannabis proposals, and they are not just blue states doing it. In fact, it's definitely red states doing it, and including 100% of the states approving the measures in front of them this last cycle. So there's a state sort of uprising around access to medical cannabis and adult use cannabis. I think we'll see more of that. And the growth of it, what is it, 35 states and 4 territories have legalized medical cannabis. You know, it's a majority of our states. So that's going to continue to put pressure on the federal government to work with cannabis to make it safe, to provide banking, et cetera. So, and then at local levels as well, here in the state of California, a lot of local measures focusing on retail and taxation that have opened up the marketplace. You know, added taxes, but also authorized. So I think that's a good thing given the local authorization that's required in the state of California. And then what is going to happen at the state level in California going forward? I think there's definitely unfinished business that I have with respect to reducing and simplifying the tax structure in the state of California, whether it be eliminating the cultivation tax and reducing the excise tax. We had proposed from 15% down to 11 over a period of three years. We've tried 3 times. And so I think in order to get it through, we need to think about our strategy and maybe approach another strategy, especially now with a California budget that is projected to be $54 billion in the red. We're projecting a $54 billion deficit. Anything that my colleagues think could reduce revenue will not be looked upon fondly. And I don't think that this will reduce revenue. I think it will increase revenue because by reducing taxes, it reduces an obstacle. It brings more people into the tax base, which raises taxes overall. We've seen that happen in Washington. We've seen that happen in Oregon. But it's an argument that is not persuasive to all my colleagues. So we need to figure out how to get this through, maybe in the budget or maybe another approach. Protecting patients so that they have access to medical cannabis, very important. I know it's very important to Dale, CalNormal. Very important to me. It's the right thing to do. It's the fair thing to do. There are protections for employees who use other medicines. They should have the same protections when they use medical cannabis. And then you know, just working with our federal partners and to provide the potential opportunity, maybe through an executive order, of interstate commerce. And I know we'll hear from Adam Smith on that. I've talked to Adam about that in the past. But for the different states that have already have approvals for legalized medical and or adult use, can there be interstate commerce between those states? I think that's I believe Washington and Oregon already have bills that are law that would be triggered by federal authorization. And that might be something California thinks about in this legislative session as well. One of the observations I have is you know, having seen a couple of different legislative battles, having seen really, in my view, good proposals that would move cannabis policy in California forward, fail. I think it's really important for the cannabis industry, to the extent possible, to be on the same page around its priorities and where it really wants to lean in and focus on. I know there's a lot of different priorities, but if they can be narrowed and focused on, and if they can also be supported by labor, it's really important. I know that the industry relation with labor has had some zigs and zags and had some good days and not as good. But that's a really important political partnership that leads to good policy for the industry. So I want to encourage that, though, you know, to seek out opportunities to find common ground, work together, strengthen those relationships. So you know, a lot of upside in the state of California, in the work between the states and what states throughout the nation are doing with respect to how they see the authorization of cannabis, you know, whether it be the care for patients, the commitment to social justice, a libertarian view. There's a lot of ways people get to the authorization and legalization of cannabis, both medical and adult use, and it's happening in red and blue states. You know, but the push from you, those on the ground, the leaders, the doers, the change makers, is going to be really important, in partnerships with progressive, forward-thinking on cannabis and other issue leaders like Congressmember Correa. It's also something that I hope to be viewed as by you as partners to keep the fight going in our legislatures and in the halls of Congress is going to be really important as well. So let me leave it at that for my reflections, but I see a lot of blue skies and opportunity ahead for the cannabis industry and for the future of cannabis, but it will take a push and organization and collaboration and focus and certainly partnership between industry leaders, those on the ground doing the work and our legislative leaders.
Well,
I'll hand it back to you, Susan.
that's great. Rob, you said that we need to push you, but I know that you're hearing from you're hearing a lot of different things. And so how do we effectively push you? I know Congressman Correa told me, just send me an email that says, hey, Lou, do your job. And then X, Y, Z. Okay, that's easy. But, you know, I know in the state, you're just hearing from a lot of folks. So how do you want us to approach that?
Just tell Max and then he'll tell me. And
Okay.
no, I'm kidding. Sort of kidding, but I talk to Max all the time about cannabis. I trust him unconditionally about his views and his proposals. But I've worked with so many of you, and what you have to say to me is always important. I always appreciate a personal outreach, you know, whether it's a text or call. Or we can do a coalition call if folks are, you know, if it's multiple folks who have the same issue and it's a priority for all of you, and see how, and we can see how we can work on it together. But and then I can try to round up the sort of folks, you know, the original MCRSA authors that I've worked with, others who I know have an interest in cannabis, and we can try to strategize together to overcome some of the, you know, what still exists, which is there's stigma around cannabis. There's ongoing political you know, challenges and obstacles with cannabis, but the direct outreach to me first, so that we can sort of work together and plan a strategy, I think is the first step.
Susan, if I may, can I throw in a comment here?
Of course.
In terms of the lobbying, I said send me an email, but you didn't read the footnote on that comment I made.
Okay.
And that was that you have to be effective lobbyists. And I think what you need to do is continue to work on building the relationship with individual legislators. And like Rob said, Mr. Bonta, with labor as well. These are very difficult times in terms of the budget. I've been there, done that when I was in Sacramento, horrible budget situations. But we have to drill down and make people understand that cannabis is an elastic product in economic terms, which means in many cases, if you reduce the price, reduce the taxes, the revenue is going to go up. And the reason being that cannabis is unique. Your competition is not within you all, it's with the black market. Okay, so the more regulation you have, the higher taxes there are, the more folks are going to go into the cheaper black market to buy stuff that is probably laced with chemicals. And you have to make the strong argument with labor and the other members of the legislature that if you reduce taxes, go easy on the regulation, you're going to have higher revenue because people are going to come to you to buy, you know, their cannabis as opposed to the guy in the garage somewhere. We you know, I often get into an arguments with my colleagues from Oregon and Washington, and I tell them, I say, California grows the best cannabis in the world, and we need to make sure that everybody knows that and comes and buys cannabis from you, the regulated California industry. Thank you.
Yeah, we just need to be competitive. Did you have anything you wanted to say to that, Assembly Member?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the Congress member. He's very experienced, obviously, and very talented, and knows what effective lobbying looks like. And if it's a coalition, it's even more powerful, like a coalition of the industry from, you know, north and south, from cultivation to retail and everything in between, distribution, et cetera. If it includes labor, if you're coming in with your labor partners and you're saying this is a priority for us, then, you know, that's really gonna, you know, catch our attention. And it will be viewed as a, you know, thoughtful, strategic, powerful approach to getting something done. So to the extent you can help build in, you know, those coalitions with across the industry and with labor, it makes it even stronger.
That's great. You know, this is supposed to be about cannabis, but we do want to grab Del while we can and talk about all the drugs, especially psilocybin. So I'd like to hear from both you, Assembly Member and Congressman, on what you think the appetite. Oh, happy 420, everybody! What you think the appetite is in California and on a federal level for the other drugs. But let's also hear from Dell. Dell, you're muted. If you could unmute yourself and talk about, don't let all of the cats out of the bag, but please do share some exciting stuff. Dell, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I think it's time to also look beyond cannabis to some of the new frontiers that are starting to open up on the landscape of psychedelic compounds and the benefit for that they may hold for treatment of mental health issues and CNS disorders, really revolutionary approaches to how we treat a whole range of mental issues, and including a new way of conceptualizing the way the brain works, and how we can move out of the what I would refer to as the default mode network and be able to gain meta perspectives and cognitive enhancement by virtue of a more accessible access to psychedelic compounds. So, it is, Oregon being the first to legalize psilocybin therapy is paving the way for a new industry in Oregon, where people will be able to access these very safe compounds under controlled clinical circumstances. And I believe it will also spawn a new industry there, not simply access to mushrooms and psilocybin therapy, but a whole range of products that, in the same way that cannabis opened up the idea of entourage compounds, I think we see entourage compounds in mushrooms as well. And we will be seeing unique products that are mixtures of different minor mushroom compounds with active principle, and a whole new range of possibilities to address mental health issues and cognitive enhancement. And I'm very pleased that Washington, D.C. legalized all psychedelic plants, not simply mushrooms, but access to all of them. So we see this tremendous democratization of access to psychedelic botanicals opening up. And I think that's super exciting because it also helps to increase activity in the pharmaceutical side of things as well, and open up things there. So we have kind of two movements running along in parallel, a democratization movement of access to psychedelic botanicals, as well as a new pharmaceutical strategy for dealing with mental health issues.
Is there any talk on the Hill or in Sacramento about psilocybin? Lou? Lou?
Thank you. About a year ago, I co-authored some legislation led by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez on this specific issue. We were on the floor of Congress debating the Republican then leader and opposed to our legislation. The arguments were very similar to the ones that Dell just made. And of course, we were not successful in moving our legislation, but I think that's the first time, at least in my memory, that we've actually debated a bill like that on the floor of Congress. Again, the issue is the stigma. Even some Democrats, actually, it was up for a vote, died a bloody death, but the bill actually got a number of Democrats and Republicans to vote for it. And shockingly, was not just the progressive Democrats, but very conservative Democrats as well as Republicans. The libertarian perspective actually was a compelling argument for a lot of members of Congress to vote for the legislation. I'm glad that we took that step, but I think the key to all of this, like Dale said, is the medical research aspect. I think that, again, 70 years of the war on drugs has really hurt our ability to do research, medical research into these issues, into these substances and how they interact with the human body. We ignored the fact that people take this stuff anyway, so why shouldn't we figure out how it, you know, how it interacts with your body? And I'm hoping that as we move forward, we can begin to reverse the concept of stigma, negative stigma, and begin to do research. Hopefully, we will, Rob. Hopefully, we can follow the lead of Oregon and begin to legalize this kind of activity in the state of California for the men, at least for research. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree with Congressmember on kind of the journey that authorizing psilocybin statewide would need to take. I think a lot of the same arguments that were made about medical cannabis, that, you know, the medical attributes, getting that locked down with appropriate you know, research and you know, having groups whose imprimatur, whose stamp of approval is really important, like the California Medical Association would help. I don't know necessarily that they would, and it doesn't have to be them, but, you know, having some sort of trusted third-party validators be in support on the medical side. I do, knowing my colleagues as I do, I know that the stigma will be powerful for them on something that is not as known to them, that they're still, that, you know, the stigma on cannabis is still, it still exists and is still being shed in the legislature. So I know that for psilocybin, it would be strong as well. And being able to point to others who've done it first and done it well, and had a model, and there's always a little bit of sort of California competition with states like Oregon and others. We like to be first, but and at least we want to be on the cutting edge among the first. So if Oregon's got it, you know, has done it well, and there's good data to show that, you know, it's safe and it's helpful, and all the positive attributes that Dale just talked about are you know, can be validated and demonstrated. I think that would be the pathway. But right now, I think we have Oregon who's done it. In my own district, I think Oakland has decriminalized psilocybin. So there is some precedent, but it's early stage yet, I think. In order to get some of the votes among you know, the Democrats and maybe, you know, to Congressmember Correa's point, maybe some Republicans would be supportive on the libertarian philosophy. I think it'll take a little more education still as well. But I appreciate that you're highlighting it. I appreciate that Oregon has pushed on it. So there's kind of an outside push and a sort of inherent competitiveness with Oregon, and then it's starting to percolate within the state too, in places like Oakland. So maybe if other cities did it as well, that would start to create some momentum that could build up to California legislative action. But then again, and there's always the proposition path, which was the path for medical cannabis. And sometimes if the legislature is reluctant or unwilling to do something, the people will.
Yeah, I wanted to bring Adam in on at this point because he's got the Oregon perspective too, and he's got some insights on that. So Adam, did you want to add anything to this conversation?
Well, in terms of the psychedelics, I would say that the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies is in their phase 3 trials with MDMA as a treatment for PTSD, and they define PTSD broadly as trauma, not just battlefield PTSD. And based on their phase 2 results, which were just absolutely mind-blowingly good, I think my recollection from phase 2 is that after 12 months after treatment, 78% of participants no longer met the definition for PTSD, were no longer identifiable as PTSD sufferers. And if the phase 3 trials go anything like that, and given the crisis in trauma that we have in this country, and how trauma begets violence, which then begets trauma, I think when that comes out, and I'm hoping by the end of the year those will come out, it's going to really grab the attention of the country, and it's going to really open up people's eyes to what the possibilities are with psychedelic assisted therapy. We're really excited in Oregon that we did this. I have some faith in the state, because the way this was written, the state will have to set up guidelines and a regulatory structure for psychedelic therapy, but I have some faith that Oregon's going to try to do that with an open mind and do it well. And it's certainly a major first step toward opening up psychedelic therapy and really changing the conversations around psychedelics overall.
That's great. I wanted to, Rob, you said that you thought that it might be best to do a ballot initiative, more effective. Because what I thought when I first was asked to work on the psilocybin issue several years ago, I said, wow, you know, they're just going to say you give them an inch and they'll take a mushroom, you know, and that we would be hit with this really bad, you know, pushback. But that hasn't been the case. We actually have investors that are just coming at us wanting to jump in on this whole new movement. And what we're hearing is that psilocybin doesn't have the baggage that cannabis does. It doesn't have the long drug war. And it's actually kind of more of a, unfortunately, it's looked at as a white person's drug. And so I mean, for whatever reason, the people that we're talking to are like ready. You know, the money's there. Look how much money did MAPS raise during a pandemic, Adam, this year? You're muted. You're muted.
I saw a number of $30 million.
$30 million.
But I'm not, I don't know that for a fact. But that's a number I saw. They've done a good job raising money to get ready to launch this, I think.
And that's a nonprofit organization, you know, that's not going to be paying any investors. There are investors that want in. So
yeah, they're dedicated, I think, to from what I know. I mean, I've known Rick Doblin for a very long time, but they're dedicated to doing this without investors so that they can really be advocates for the therapy in ways that are, you know, not driven by necessarily investors' interests. And I know Rick's been really committed to that for a long time. And I think we should all be pretty thankful of Rick Doblin's 25-year journey to take on the FDA and make this happen.
Yeah.
Can I add a couple of thoughts?
Yes, please.
Thank you. As I was listening to Rob speak about coalitions, I was reminded of my work on cannabis back in 2012, 2013. And I think the ingredient that I brought to the whole discussion when I was a state senator is I was able to bring public safety to the table. The California police chiefs, and I was very good friends, still am with them, realized one day that the genie was out of the bottle again, and we needed to regulate. As opposed to say no, we had to regulate. And I think that was a key to a lot of the changes in California. I think Rob is correct. You're probably going to have to go through an initiative process in California. With that being said, I would try to check the temperature with some of the public safety groups like PORAC and some of the others, and just check and see what their feelings are on this issue and what would make them comfortable in coming to an understanding, a partnership with the industry to move this issue ahead. Again, the concept is it's better to regulate than to fight a tidal wave that's going to run you over anyway. So think about that a little bit, and then also would give you a reading in terms of the temperature, the reception for something like this at the legislative level. Thank you.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, and just sort of building off that, I think you asked me the question of whether I thought the proposition path initiative was the best way. I don't know if it's the best way. Probably today, the second, probably the most likely to be successful way. But just given my colleagues as I know them, not being as educated on this issue, not knowing the different components of it, not knowing what sort of trusted third-party validators would be part of an alliance and support. I mean, if PORAC and CMA say, we like this, we think this is a good idea, and they walk into legislators' offices and say, we've seen the studies, we think it's important to regulate this to make it safe. And by the way, we're going to tax it too, so the state will get some revenue during its $54 billion deficit. You know, then you're in business with the legislature. You know, you're sort of, you're addressing the concerns as they are. But I believe Oregon passed it as an initiative, and maybe that's the way that California would do it today. But I was just trying to chart out the different pathways to show that there's multiple pathways, and that given the resistance that you see in one, you might want to pursue another.
One thing I would like to point out is that I believe UC Berkeley has a program in psychedelic research. UCSD has the Psychedelic Health Initiative. Davis has a program underway. We're seeing a groundswell at the university level of research into psychedelic compounds. And one other thing I did want to address, we have so many communities that are impacted by trauma, and a way of addressing treatment of this trauma is through these compounds and the use of these compounds. Memory-based trauma is right in their wheelhouse for, as Adam pointed out, in terms of the MAPS clinical trials. We're seeing broadly memory-based trauma, PTSD, as broadly as it can be conceived, being a perfect candidate for treatment with psychedelic compounds.
Yeah, bravo. Okay, so let's move on, because this is about cannabis. And Adam, please share the new plan for interstate commerce.
Hi. So, as we've discussed, and I'll try to be quick because there's a lot of really amazing people. First, thanks for having me on the panel. This is an amazing group, a lot of friends here, and a number of people I'm dying to meet. So we're looking probably at a Biden administration, and Biden's been very clear during the campaign that he wants to be a reformer, but that he's not there on federal legalization yet. Even Kamala Harris, I keep wanting to call her vice president-elect, maybe tonight. Kamala Harris has said, who knows the difference, has talked about decriminalizing and has not talked about legalizing on the trail. And so, but it's also clear they want to be cannabis friendly, right? And so now that we're looking at probably a Republican Senate, most likely, I think the pressure is off of them on legalization, because I don't think it's going to get to them. But we have states that are legalizing. New York and New Jersey just legalized. And under the current system, we're about to watch New York and New Jersey and Arizona, and very soon Pennsylvania, probably Rhode Island and others, begin building state siloed production capacity. That's hard asset indoor production capacity to grow every ounce of flower and every ton of biomass for massive consumer markets, indoors, under lights and temperature and humidity control. It's environmentally unsupportable. But it's also economically unsustainable. When federal legalization happens, the Commerce Clause of the U.S. Constitution will forbid states from discriminating against the products of other states. And so cannabis from California and Oregon are going to move into the markets of New York and New Jersey. And whether that's in 2021 or 2023 or 25, immediately most of the capacity that is going to be hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment in those states is going to become non-competitive, right? And so because they can't compete with biomass grown outdoors, it's just not reality. And so, but we can move product, right? We don't have to wait. States can't wait for federal legalization in order to move product from where it's best produced to the markets where there's most demand. And so we are asking governors, and we are focused very much on Oregon and California. And in Oregon, Governor Brown signed a law that will allow the state to enter into interstate compacts. And New York and New Jersey, now we're going to start to look into Arizona, who have not yet handed out production licenses to giant companies that can build, $60 million facilities, to legalize with an understanding that they will be signing a compact to allow commerce between those states. And two things will happen immediately if we do that. In the middle of a recession on the West Coast, you are going to see immediately thousands of farms and businesses will, from small to large, will have their valuations increased by multiples. This will bring an immediate wave of new investment, expansion, and thousands of jobs in the middle of a recession. In New York, in states like New York and New Jersey, the idea that they would be able to get an industry up and running with stable supply chains in 6 to 18 months versus 3 to 5 to who knows how many years means we will see immediate wave of investment, business formation, and tens of thousands of jobs now in the middle of a recession. And this is a way to build and to begin to put the regulatory framework of a national industry together. This will also give state regulators the chance to build that regulatory framework, and they are the ones who best understand the workings of the industry. If we handed regulation to the federal government tomorrow, there's a lot of people in this industry who'd be very concerned about what would be the result of that, what would come out of that. But this is a chance for the states that have a real incentive to have their industries work, to move people out of illicit markets as quickly as possible, and to have their industries be sustainable and create jobs, to build that industry. And there is no, we very strongly believe that if the governors of New York, New Jersey, Oregon, and California, and potentially others agreed to an interstate compact and brought that to Congress, it would get passed even through a Republican Senate. It could get passed as an amendment. It could get passed as a rider to appropriations. But there is enough belief in states' rights and free markets on the Republican side that I don't think that that would be something that they would stop. For instance, the appropriations process for. And so this is an opportunity to move forward in a way that is going to build the industry that we are ultimately going to have, the interstate industry that that cannabis, once legalization happens, has to be. And so I would just mention, we have, if you find us at sensiblemarkets.org, you can endorse the concept as we move forward. And in the next few months, we will be, doing the work to bring those governors into an agreement. And we think it's an exciting pathway forward.
Do you have any thoughts on that, Congressman? I mean, just logistically getting cannabis from California all the way to Washington, D.C. That's one of the.
Adam, I think it's a novel concept. You make some great points. I'd like to explore this with you a little bit further, and would be very interested in trying to figure out if we can put some legislative language together, or even just a letter to see how many signatures that we can get from other legislators to just feel the temperature on something like this. But I think it's a great new way to take care of this issue. And what do I believe? I think it's a doable. I think it'd be great to try to do it. I think Mr. McConnell will probably throw water on it, but what the heck, let's try the Hail Mary pass and see what happens. It's worth it. I like the idea. Thank you. And I'll be in touch.
Thank you. Happy to speak with you.
Do you have any thoughts, Assembly Member?
Yeah, same. I think it's a good idea. I maybe I don't have as much faith in Mr. McConnell and the U.S. Senate. I do think they might want to block it. They should already be honoring states' rights by now if there was consistency, internal consistency, and lack of hypocrisy. I worry about that as a challenge, but I do think that you should continue to push the issue. You should get states to pass the state bills, the first part, and then you can say this many states await congressional approval. And as soon as the congressional approval is provided, then they can all start their interstate compacts, and then kind of keep the drumbeat going around states' rights and the voice of the people who've approved cannabis in all of these states. So I really believe that there's building momentum around this. I appreciate Adam's vision and push on this issue. I think California should be part of it and should authorize a bill like Oregon and Washington have. And if you get all the states who've legalized it sitting there saying we're ready, what are you going to do, Congress? Then it just puts pressure on Congress. But Mr. McConnell has resisted pressure in the past. So the things you would think most rational actors would do, he doesn't do it.
Yes, and he's going to be there. So do you have any rebuttal to that, Adam?
No, I think that McConnell is definitely the stumbling block. One of the things that we're looking to do, we've been waiting for the results of this election, and one of the things that is important is now we are going to start to explore with some of the Republican governors. Again, Arizona just legalized, and I'm not sure that their governor is interested in going through a whole process to legalize mass production in their state. Utah just legalized medical, and they are not that interested in legalizing production if they can help it, it seems like. So there are options to bring in Republican governors as well. And there's a very strong economic argument to be made. And so we like our chances if we have governors walking forward with an agreement in hand saying this is how we want to handle it. And we have a president that has said, and the DNC platform says, let the states take the lead. And so we think this is sort of the sweet spot for the Biden administration, and willing to take our chances to move forward and push it through, again, as possibly an amendment or a rider to the to appropriations.
Folks, I got to run. I want to thank all of you for giving me the honor to speak with you. And Rob, I look forward to continuing our relationship.
Likewise,
Susan
Lou.
and all of you. Adam, look forward to talking with you. Take care, everybody.
Guys,
Bye-bye.
thank you, Lou. Thank you so much. Okay, I know that Assemblymember Bonta needs to go pretty soon too. I wanted to bring on, we're going to go in alphabetical order, and I want to bring on Dale Geringer next. He is the California Director of Cal Normal, and he follows all of this stuff like crazy. So Dale, what do you got to tell us? Unmute yourself first. Dale, unmute yourself. You need to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Okay.
There we go.
Thank you. Yes, it was indeed, it was a very encouraging night for drugs and marijuana in particular. I must say, watching those returns, it was really sobering and disheartening to see how divided the country still is, and particularly the likely situation of having a split government with the Senate under Republican control, which really puts a damper on what I had, the high hopes I had for passage of something like the MORE Act. However, on the plus side, the states that legalized included really strong Republican states like Montana, South Dakota, Arizona, which is great, and Mississippi went for medical marijuana. On the downside, none of those states are Kentucky, where Mitch McConnell is from, South Carolina, where Lindsey Graham comes from, or Idaho, where Senator Crapo, chair of the banking committee that oversees the banking bill, comes from. So that is bad news. Very good news, however, I think, was Oregon's passage of a comprehensive drug decriminalization initiative. I think this is really a major development, and I'd like to ask Rob Bonta about what he sees as prospects for advancing that kind of thing in California. But before I do so, let me just run over what happened here in California. We had 38 different local cannabis measures on the ballot this year in towns across the state. These are all tracked at California Normal's website, and we have the latest returns there, which were very favorable, as they usually are. Almost all of these measures were measures authorizing local governments to allow cannabis businesses, and all of them involved some measure of taxation as well, which makes them good with the voters. So out of those 38 measures, well, there were actually measures in 36 cities, and 32 approved them. And one of the measures that went down was actually a bad measure in Shasta Lake, one that would have limited the number of cannabis businesses there. So that was actually a victory for our side. There were like 3 towns, Yountville in Napa County, and Jurupa Valley and Solana Beach, which turned down cannabis measures. And there were 2 interesting cases where a measure sponsored by the city government beat measures that were sponsored, I think, by advocates in the industry. There's a lesson there. It was in Sonoma and Pomona. But other than that, results were really good and favorable, and I see continual movement toward further expansion of availability and access to legal cannabis here in California. With that, I would like to ask Rob Bonta again about this drug decriminalization issue in Oregon.
Yeah, I think it's something that we have to consider as a state that is reform-minded, that is about compassion and humanity and smart justice, and that is seeking to cure and heal after the war on drugs and move forward. And there is more and more momentum and consensus agreement around the idea that for simple possession of drugs, you shouldn't be criminalizing, that it's about people and about public health. And I think they have a fine in Oregon under their measure, as well as requirement that you get treatment. I think again, Oregon's movement early is kind of a challenge of sorts to California to consider where we want to be on leadership for criminal justice reform and drug decriminalization. So all that's to say, I think there is definite possibility in California. Again, I note that they did it by referendum, or sorry, by state proposition, not through their legislature. I think there could be challenges in our legislature for something like this. But we have generally supported criminal justice reform statewide propositions in the state of California.
You need to unmute yourself again, Dale. Sorry. Did you have anything else you wanted to say, Dale? Well, you need to unmute yourself. Dale, you're muted. You're muted. There you go.
And a bad mouse here. Yeah, I just did want to note it was too bad about the, I guess it was a Prop 25 here in California, the no cash bail did get turned down. I hope this isn't the end of the story, but it isn't helpful right now. And but it is good. Also, I guess it was a Proposition 2021 that was trying to reinstitute tougher sentences for certain kinds of offenders, seems to have gone down fairly roundly. So it does appear that California voters do not have an appetite for locking people up and throwing away the key the way they did 20 or 30 years ago.
And that's why we live here. Okay, thank you, Dale. We've got a lot of people to move through, and we're going to do a lot of more back and forth. But right now, let's hear from Eric Sklar. Where are you?
I'm here, Susan.
There we go. What are
Hey,
your
Susan.
thoughts?
Well, really great information so far. Really grateful to Assemblymember Bonta and Congressman Correa for their leadership on this, to Adam for the incredible work he's doing on interstate work. I think that's critical to a future federal patchwork of laws that we're going to be facing. Federal legalization won't simplify things initially. Even when it happens, it's going to continue to be very complex for a long time. And if we can ship across state lines, it makes much more economic and environmental sense, as Adam said. One thing that maybe it's a little different than we've talked about so far is that, there is executive authority, and a President Biden, even without a Senate, in control, and a Democratic House sending things to the House repeatedly can make a difference. For instance, we could have a new version of the Cole memo, and it could very easily say that states that are contiguous and have legalized can ship between them. Something like that could happen. There's always constitutional questions about executive action without legislative action, but we've seen from the past 5 or 6 presidents that they're not afraid to use executive action to get things done. So, while we fight on all levels, it's really a local, city, county, state, and federal effort on all kinds of issues. At the federal level, I see us pushing, if we have a Biden administration, for them to do what they can right away for things that aren't maybe full legalization, but start to chip away at it. That would be really helpful, and I think we all need to work on that. In California, clearly, the biggest barriers right now, in addition to the taxation issues, which, as Assemblymember Bonta said, are not going to be solved in the short run, the biggest problem is local obstacles to the legal market. When local authorities will not allow dispensaries to open, when they will not allow cultivation in rural areas, it keeps the illegal market alive. And so I think that we've got to push equally hard on the local and the federal level while working with our partners at the state level to move things along.
Perfect. Thank you. You didn't introduce yourself. Tell us who you are.
Okay, happy to do that. Again, my name is Eric Sklar. I'm the CEO and founder of Fume. We're a vertically integrated cannabis company based in Napa Valley, where the city of American Canyon allows everything but retail, and the city of Napa allows not medical retail. Yountville, as Dale said, did not allow retail this week in the election, but we're moving forward here. But I also have another life. I've been elected official. I was a city council member and vice mayor in St. Helena, as well as a planning commissioner, and I'm currently president of the California Fish and Game Commission. So I've worked both at state and local government levels.
Right, right. How was your harvest this year? Are you done harvesting?
No, we've got another 2 weeks, and it's outstanding. There was a lot of concern, obviously, from friends and from colleagues about the fires up here in Lake County where we cultivate.
Right.
I've been in the grape growing business for 40 years. My family has since I was a teenager. Grapes are terribly impacted by smoke. It gets on the skins, and the skins go in the fermentation tank, and the wine tastes like smoke. Cannabis, we're finding, doesn't have much of an effect, which is surprising because you would think this big sticky flower would just capture every aroma in the air, but it doesn't seem to do that, number one. And number two, sometimes the darker sky in late July and August tricks the plants into thinking that the days are getting shorter, and they start flowering earlier, and we get bigger buds and greater yields, even sometimes higher THC. It's still anecdotal. There hasn't been a long enough history of studying this in a scientific way, but the fires don't seem to be too bad for cannabis.
Wow, so you're saying 2020 was a good year for outdoor?
A great year for outdoor.
That's amazing. I know that he's gone now, but Dell over at Leaf Labs, they're remediating some cannabis that does have the smoky issues. So, and they're pushing through 10,000 pounds a day.
Right. It seems to be more of a problem if you're extracting, because it does concentrate the flavors. If it's flour or for either smoking, rolling your own, or for pre-rolls,
Right.
you're lighting it on fire anyway. So there's going to be a smoky smell when you're consuming it. So it just doesn't seem to have enough of an effect to matter.
Okay, great. Okay, we're going to come back to you. Up next, we've got Felicia Carbajal, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say because I know you're a political nerd.
Hi, everyone. My name is Felicia Carbajal. I'm an intersectional activist, a values-based community organizer, a consultant, and a social entrepreneur. And this year I didn't geek out as much as I usually do. I think, I made calls like a lot of folks. I'm hoping a lot of folks did. My family's originally from Arizona and indigenous to that area in particular. So I made sure to make as many calls as I could. That mixed bag feeling, like as somebody who worked on President Obama's first campaign and also got married during that tiny little window during Prop 8, like for me, I still have this mixed bag feeling like, oh, great, everybody likes drugs. Or at least they like the idea of it being taxed. Like, I don't want everybody to get ahead of themselves in the industry and think just because they voted to legalize that everybody's going to come running to your stores, because that's kind of not how it works, as we see time and time again. But I'm excited. I'm excited about just the change that's happening. And I know one of the reoccurring questions that's been going on is like, what is California going to do in terms of a ballot measure? Well, I know that I've been approached a few months ago about some things happening in California. So I'd say folks should stay tuned, because I know that there's conversations going on in terms of how are we going to decriminalize all drugs, and how are we going to make places safer and people feel safer in this state in particular, which excites me. Yeah, I don't know. Has everybody breathed? That's like my big question when I get on Zoom. Like, you guys, have you taken a second to breathe? Have you had a second to consume any cannabis? What are you doing for self-care? Because these are very trying times, right? In terms of just the anticipation, my nails are a little gone right now. I haven't been a nail biter for a long time, but I'm quasi not a nail biter right now. Just because, as somebody who sits on so many intersections, as somebody who's formerly incarcerated, who got to see amazing things happen in my city of Los Angeles, like, I would like to say that I think that's going to be more of the trend. Like, we are going to figure out those ways to collectively come together and make sure that everything is done correctly, so that when we see legalization measures occurring across the country, not only do we want social equity to be at the forefront, but we're also going to make sure that care is at the forefront as well. So I don't know, I'm excited. I'm a proud Angelino, like, independent of a lot of other places. I know that we kicked ass here. So I'm excited about that.
Yay. I'm glad you're excited. We need some excitement. Okay, next we're gonna hear from Frenchie Cannoli. And I'm super excited because I got to hang out with him last week. It was so much fun. We both came out of our bunkers for a minute and we just happened to bump into each other. But I'd like to, especially because you're not really an outsider, but kind of. What do you think? What the heck did we just do?
I am an outsider, and I am an outsider that lived 20 years in producing country before coming to California, which is considered as a producing country, since you are the fifth economic power on the planet. And as we can all see, interstate is inevitable. If there is interstate, there is world trade that comes straight after. And then we go back to the basic of a market, quantity versus quality. And if we look at Canada, which is the best example, we can see they put everything on the infrastructure. They have 100 million of square feet of greenhouse, and they failed lamentably because the legacy market was never involved. They forget rule number one. If you don't make quality, nobody will want it. It will stay on the shelf. It will finish in the garbage can. So, Congressman Correa nailed it. It's not California that is known the world over for his cannabis, for his reputation of quality. It's the Emerald Triangle. The most secretive people on the planet are recognized worldwide for their quality. And now that the state of California is starting to play the appellation game, the only place on the planet that can have the right to an appellation is the Emerald Triangle. That's your heritage. That's the only way for the US cannabis industry to be relevant in the next 5 to 10 years. Because you're all talking about quantity, but none of you has ever been in a producing country. You should, before investing the money in mass production, you may want to visit some of the producing countries in the world because this is going to be your competition. The only edge you have is the heritage of the EP from the Emerald Triangle. If you don't protect them, you lose that heritage. You will lose the goose that give you the golden eggs. Not only you don't kill that goose is going to go to the neighbor to make those eggs, and you lose everything. It's like you can become, California can be the France of the cannabis industry, and the Emerald Triangle is most certainly the Bordeaux of the of the cannabis industry worldwide. If you don't protect and nurture those little farmers that are not yet into the legal market, that are still part of the legacy, you will not be relevant in the next 5 years because you live on an island, you don't know your competition. That competition has been growing cannabis for tens of millennium illegally. When it became legal, Morocco, to give you an example, they didn't make hashish before the late 60s. Today, they produce 35% of the world production in a teeny corner, in a mountain with a really poor soil and no real potential value to grow anything but olive tree and cannabis. And there is little farms that have millions of plants, natural plants that are local landrace that do not need care or a massive investment to grow. That will be your competition. So the future is a world market. The future is first interstate. Interstate, it's competition. You want to compete? We have a reputation of being able to provide the best. But the heritage, the people that provide that best, that knowledge, that dedication, that genetic, if you don't protect it, you lose it all.
Yeah, so you're saying that California needs to protect their brand, California grown. That's,
No.
I know, Emerald Triangle.
I don't say it's like you go and make wine in France, but you go to Bordeaux to make that wine.
Right.
A very specific terroir. Will you tell people that you made wine in France? You made your wine in Bordeaux, the only place that is known worldwide for its reputation. It's the Emerald Triangle and the 3 generations of farmers that created that heritage.
Yeah, I love your passion, Frenchie. I love you. Stay here. We're gonna do some back and forth, but right now we're gonna hear from Hirsch Jane. What do you think?
Thanks, Susan. Hey everyone, my name's Hirsch Jane. I'm the Director of Government Affairs at Caliva, which is a cannabis company based in San Jose. And you know, I really agree with a lot of what has been said so far. So I'll just say a couple of things quickly. One thing is that much has been made of the fact that red states like Montana and South Dakota legalized cannabis, which I think really says something. But I think just as big of an impact will be felt in neighboring states, right? A lot of those red states, they neighbor prohibition states, right? States like Idaho, states like North Dakota, states like Nebraska, even the medical states that are adjacent there are states like Minnesota or Iowa that are very restrictive. And I think one of the reasons Illinois, opening up to adult use was so consequential is that folks from neighboring states would drive into Illinois and purchase cannabis, so much so that a fifth of their tax revenues from neighboring states. And so I think that really can change the political dynamics in a lot of those prohibition states. So I think that'll be interesting to watch. And the second thing I'll note, Dale was mentioning earlier that out of the 38, or so ballot measures in California, 30 or 31 of them may have passed. And I think as many of us know, these are in all different types of communities in California, in all different regions of the state. Some are in urban areas, some suburban, some rural, really different political dynamics. And a lot of them passed with super majorities. And so that really shows that communities around California are ready to open up to cannabis, which I think is a really positive thing. I think the important thing is, as these ordinances start to get crafted, how are they crafted in a way that enables broad participation, in the market? Because obviously prohibition is not a binary, it's a spectrum. There are many cities that have technically opened up for cannabis and yet have ordinances that are very restrictive, right? That have very limited licenses, that require a property in order to participate, that require you to have 3 lawyers in order to navigate the land use process. And so I guess what I'm saying is now that cities have expressed and indicated a willingness to open up to cannabis, it's incumbent upon a lot of us to make sure they pass ordinances that enable broad participation in the market so as many people can sort of participate as possible. So thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, next we've got Dr. Jehan Marcoux.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Susan. My name is Jehan Marcoux. I'm currently the editor-in-chief of the American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, but I've been involved with cannabis research, the industry, and regulatory affairs in this space since the turn of the century. I want to echo and build on what Congressman Correa and Assemblyman Bonta have said, and emphasize that we need to conduct research and allow evidence to drive policy associated with these new industries. We have to push for conformity in testing and labeling and make sure the decision makers all have access to the same data set. There's also a big public health issue. We need more guardrails for this explosion of uncontrolled product diversification. These elections results and these new measures are going to take longer, are going to take a long time to take an effect, longer than an edible. This is our chance not to make the same mistakes that we've made in the past with this copy and paste phenomena we've seen, which has not worked out so well with many regulations and standards. So again, policy changes need to be accompanied by relationships formed between the industry, government, and academia to establish this evidence base. We need a collective body of evidence, including the industry coming together with their adverse events that they have and they know about in order to critically evaluate what has happened, figure out what will work to meet this societal need while keeping the public safe. Thank you.
Awesome. So when you mentioned copy and paste, my brain went straight to the 5 nanograms. Is that what you were talking about?
Well, that's a great example of a lack of a scientific approach. You know, impairment testing that's already used by law enforcement, the horizontal gaze and walk in a straight line and that sort of thing is actually more reliable than any sort of blood testing. Blood testing is very unreliable in terms of predicting impairment. You know, that's because whatever, you know, it has to do with science and, you know, the binding of proteins in the blood versus what's available to test. It's really not a science, and that was not based on any real world evidence. Yeah, so we need evidence to guide these policies, and it's floating out there. It just needs to come together. Yeah.
Unfortunately, less and less Americans believe in science, but we need to turn that boat around. I know that I probably have 5 nanograms in my blood at all times. Never do I have less.
And Susan, if I can just tease you just a little bit about something you said. And I just in playful jest, you know, I have to wonder what the Aztecs and Mayans would say about their sacred mushrooms being considered a white person's drug. Just something that came to mind.
No, I know. I was racking my brain for why it was moving forward so quickly, and I got to spend some time with Swami, and that was his explanation. I'm like, wow, that really sucks, but it also might be true. Ish. We shall see. Anyway, thank you so much. Hang out. We're going to come back to you. Next up is Karen O'Keefe, who has been working really hard with MPP. Well, you tell us what's going on.
So I'm the Director of State Policies at the Marijuana Policy Project. Thanks for having me on. As has been mentioned, and you all probably know, we just got 4 more legalization states added to the list. So there was a clean sweep. Arizona, New Jersey, South Dakota, and Montana are the newest legalization states, bringing the total up to 15. And the newest medical cannabis states are South Dakota, which also legalized, and Mississippi, bringing the total up to 36. And for me, the 3 big takeaways that I thought I would share from the election are: first, has been mentioned that this is not a partisan issue now. We've seen the deepest blue and the deepest red states legalize marijuana and pass medical cannabis. In South Dakota, at the same time they legalized adult use cannabis, Trump won by 25 points. And then at the other side of the spectrum, in New Jersey, at the same time they legalized cannabis, Trump lost to Biden by 20 points. So we're seeing widespread support in both parties, which is helpful with a mixed Congress and Senate likely. Next, we've seen very rapid evolution from voters. So in Arizona, as folks may recall, back in 2016, voters had voted down legalization. 2 days ago, they passed it by 60%. So that's a pretty tremendous jump in 4 years. In South Dakota, it was even more dramatic. There, it was the only state that voters had voted down even medical marijuana. Medical cannabis got only 37% of the vote in 2010. And this year, not only did they legalize medical cannabis by 70%, they also legalized adult use by 54%. So we're seeing a really, really rapid evolution. The next thing is, as Hirsch mentioned, this could move states and neighboring communities to legalize. Only about half the states in the country have the legislative process, which is why South Dakota and Montana have legalized, but New York has not. I might have said legislative, the initiative process. So in New York and about half the country, the only way to legalize marijuana is through the legislatures. And so now that more and more states have legalized marijuana through voters, hopefully we'll finally start to see some of these state legislatures act. In the next year or two, we could see as many as 6, possibly even more. The ones that I think are most likely are Connecticut and New York, which of course border Massachusetts and New Jersey, the whole Mid-Atlantic region, Maryland, Delaware, and Virginia are all very possible, and New Mexico too. Those are the 6 I would say are the most likely. So these things don't happen on their own. We've only had 2 state legislatures ever legalize cannabis. There were Illinois and Vermont, which we both led the charge on, along with local allies. So it's going to take a big campaign in each state to make it happen. But I think we have the opportunity now to do so.
And that takes money. So if you want to, in the chat, drop a link for people if they want to get involved in help.
Sure. And also volunteers too. Money definitely helps. We need lobbyists in every state. Lately there's been more opportunity than we have the funds to take advantage of, which is kind of a mixed blessing, but also, calls, texts, just like we're done with the presidential campaign to help mobilize people in key state legislative districts is helpful. So I'll drop that in the chat.
Great, fantastic. All right, next up we have got the human computer, Max Michalonis.
Well, thank you, Susan. That's
your number, Max. Rob said that we need to call you if we want to make any changes. So your phone's going to be ringing off the hook.
Fingers crossed. No, well, thank you all for the acknowledgements, and thank you for that introduction, Susan. Max Michalonis, legislative and regulatory advocate with K Street Consulting. I'm just going to try and make a couple of observations that haven't been fully made yet. First, of course, is that we're on track for record national turnout. It looked like there was strong enthusiasm both for Biden and for Trump. It wasn't a case of there not being Trump enthusiasm or Biden enthusiasm. We're going to break records nationally in terms of votes cast. Biden is going to break records in terms of number of votes a presidential candidate receives. I think that on the electoral college level, so I have Politico refreshing in the background this whole time. In terms of margins, I am confident Biden's going to win as much as with Nevada secure, keep on moving up in the right direction, up around 12,000 votes at this point. But moreover, Georgia, as of half an hour ago, narrowed the gap between Trump and Biden to 3,500 votes. So Biden is 3,500 votes behind Trump in Georgia, and I think actually Senator Bonta's longtime friend Stacey Abrams deserves a ton of credit for that, especially if Georgia does go blue. She has done incredible work there, and that's really could be a deciding factor. Additionally, Pennsylvania is now 65,000 votes margin between Trump and Biden. North Carolina, which hasn't updated today, has an 80,000 vote margin. So there's a variety of ways Biden could win that is fairly likely to happen. Pull back up my notes. I think that we're in the U.S. Senate. Right now with the Georgia results, both U.S. senators in Georgia have fallen below 50%. If there's a below 50% margin in the U.S. Senate races in Georgia, they go to runoffs. So what we could be seeing is a 48-50 U.S. Senate control with 2 open Georgia Senate seats for a runoff on January 5th, 2021. So mark your calendars for that date and get ready, because that could determine control over the U.S. Senate and whether McConnell, still is in power, or whether Democrats can, get an effective legislative agenda through over the next 2 years. I think that also, if depending on those results, it does, as others have mentioned, as Congressman Correa mentioned, really impact whether we're seeing things done by executive action, as has been suggested, or things like just were coal memo, banking, perhaps interstate commerce. I saw a question in the comments about descheduling. I don't know the bounds of executive authority on scheduling or not. That's quite definitely a long shot, but I think there'll be a good need to explore, and hopefully Sabrina and others will get to talk about what could be executive authority. On the states that approved cannabis, as we just heard, it's going from deep blue New Jersey to deep red South Dakota. I am excited by 6 Republican senators now representing states that have either legal medicinal or adult use cannabis, from Montana with Republicans there, South Dakota and Mississippi. So those Republicans, hopefully will start to listen or be educated further on the issue of cannabis now that their states have said yes to adult use on that topic. While personally I've been favoring Democrats to take the U.S. Senate, or wanting them to take the U.S. Senate because of the implications on cannabis policy, some would say that we're in a worst case scenario at this point with the Senate, because the Democrats haven't taken the Senate yet, and Republican Cory Gardner out of Colorado lost re-election, and Gardner was the most pro-cannabis Republican senator. And so I think there's an open question of who will be the champion for cannabis within the Senate Republican caucus, so the U.S. Senate Republican caucus.
Do you have any predictions on who that might be?
I don't know enough to go and say. I would be hopeful that perhaps someone that Montana, for example, or one of the senators that are in a newly legalized state or a going to legalized state could step up, but I can't speculate on that.
Okay.
Compared to everything else I can speculate on. I think one thing as we go and acknowledge this, and we acknowledge, you know, the high turnout both for Democrats and Republicans, and you know I've seen a variety of analyses on what happened and why, and I think that when we look at the presidential, yeah, the analyses that are strictly based on economic theory or class theory, you know, fall short of recognizing how, for example, you know, Florida went and went and voted to approve a minimum wage and also approve minimum wage increase and also approved Trump for president, or simultaneously those that are on look at just a race-based analysis and a white supremacy analysis can miss some of the crossover support that Trump had among certain communities of color. Though communities of color were largely and overwhelmingly for Biden, Trump did build on some margins there. And so I guess bringing that back to cannabis and looking at some of the deeper red states that approved cannabis, I have to question and ask, and folks have to push on how can we preserve these core values of equity and social, racial, and economic justice, as it were, with regards to cannabis, when we are also pushing for gains in Republican states that may not share those values. And so I'm not saying I have answers on that. That's something I want to go pose more to the panel or to the chat, is sort of this contradiction, and addressing the issues of equity head on, when you have hardcore red states going and improving cannabis. And we can be happy they approve cannabis, but there still needs to be equity. There still needs to be injustices to be addressed that have to be addressed. I want to close by talking about a national issue that not many folks have considered, which really pertains to what's going to happen next. And by that I mean looking at 2022. And by looking at 2022, I'm referring not just to perhaps 2 more years of Mitch McConnell stonewalling and leading to government shutdowns and preventing any progress from being made on cannabis or any host of policies, and just running a continued campaign of obstruction. But the idea and the concerns about with Obama's election in 2008, then there was a Tea Party backlash in 2010. And when the Tea Party backlash occurred, it occurred at just the right time, in as much as it let Republicans control the redistricting process for so many states. And we're looking at that same thing happening this cycle as well, where Republicans are set to control 4 to 5 times the number of congressional districts for purposes of redistricting in 2022. So that slim U.S. House majority, the deals that Democrats didn't expand on in the House, is going to get even slimmer if we get a bunch of more Republican gerrymanders settled in 2022, combined with 2 years of McConnell obstructionism. And so that's why this election was so critical, was because of that state legislative control, or whether it's the state legislature or the governor or the Secretary of State or some combination that controls redistricting. California has a nonpartisan redistricting, so it doesn't affect us, but it's going to be a major factor in control of the House in 2022, and to see whether Biden can have an effective presidency, and whether cannabis has a path forward through Democratic policy. So I'll close with that. Hopefully I gave you some things to think about.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. Next, we're going to hear from Major Neil Franklin. Hi. How'd you get your logo? Is that
Hey, Susan, how are you?
virtual background? I love that. Nice logo.
Yeah, it's a little virtual background. I can change it up from time to time, depending upon what I'm doing. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of practice over the past few months, and so.
Yeah, we're getting used to this virtual space. So I'm really anxious to hear what your thoughts are on what the heck just happened.
So, my brief comments are going to be mainly from a place of public safety and justice, so that I don't repeat a lot of the good things that have been heard. Obviously, it's been a great election as it relates to cannabis policy and in Oregon, all drugs, DC, psychedelics. So it's really good stuff. So I know a lot of the folks on the call, but for those that don't know me, again, my name is Neil Franklin. I'm the current executive director of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership, LEAP, and 34 years in Maryland policing with the Maryland State Police, Baltimore City, and Maryland Transit. Past 10 years, I've been working very, very hard in this area of advocacy in an effort to change our drug policies and now most of our justice issues that we're dealing with. Some good things were said about already tonight about cannabis regulation and taxes and how that lower taxes, how that increases revenue, also how it affects the illicit market. And when you hear me talking about the illicit market, you won't hear me using black market because language is important, I think. So you'll hear me referring to the illicit market. I'm also weaning myself away from the criminal justice system and using the justice system when I make reference to that as well. So obviously, again, the taxes, the more states that come online greatly affect public safety by reducing the illicit market and the violence that still surrounds the illicit market in many of our communities across the country. So that's definitely important. Also relative to police reform, which is a big focus of ours now in LEAP, you got to understand that suspected drug possession is still the #1 reason for negative police citizen contacts across the country. And marijuana, cannabis leads the way. It leads the way in that negative contact between citizens and the police by far. Generally speaking, the police don't want to give up the ability to search. And that's what cannabis is all about. The odor of it gets the police into your pockets, into your cars, into your homes. And the police don't want to give that ability to search up. And this is documented. I mean, from legislative hearing, from one to the other, you will hear the police talking about their need to be able to search people in order to find fruits of other crimes, illegal guns, and so on. But we've got to end that. And what Oregon is doing and leading the way as it relates to all drugs is just phenomenal. And so that's one of the big things that we're working on and working to push from state to state now. But I want to talk briefly also about the relationship of social, racial, and economic equity as that relates to public safety as well. Expungements, as these states come online, expungements should be automatic. Access to licenses and access to employment. Let the market dictate the number of licenses that are out there. We get into this very bad place when we try to limit these licenses. But we've got to do work as it relates to that social, racial, and economic equity and the cannabis market. So let's continue to focus and work on that. And I'll say it, our VP-elect, Kamala Harris, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think in the summer of 2019, she introduced the MORE Act to the Senate. So I think there is some hope there, with the White House moving forward and her influence with President-elect Biden going forward. The talk that we've already had regarding descheduling, I think that's a path forward as well. I mean, deschedule cannabis, through the AG, through the White House, by way of the DEA. I think that's a way to open up the other states going forward. There are many states that still want to come online by way of the legislature, but they're trying to follow the lead of the federal government. So there is a way to do it without having the Senate control of the Senate. So those are just my few comments that I have, right off the top of my head regarding this election and where we're headed. hopefully we'll have some final results about the White House before the night's over. I don't want to stay up too late tonight as I have in the past couple of nights, but Susan, thanks for having me on board, and it's great seeing everybody else. And as far as the descheduling thing goes, I know we have some smart lawyers on this on this panel tonight, like Karen, so maybe she can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for reminding us that language does matter. Some habits are hard to kick, but it is very important. Nick Easley, you're supposed to be up next, but you need to get your video on, and Vince, also you. So I'm going to go to Sabrina.
Susan, I'm gonna drop off and just say thank you to everybody. Thank you, Susan, for having me. I have another commitment, so I appreciate the opportunity to join you. Thanks for always inviting me. Thanks for the wonderful discussion. Look forward to working with all of you.
We love you, Rob.
Thank you. Likewise. Take care, everybody. Stay healthy and safe.
Okay. All right, Sabrina, come on, give us your wisdom. What's up?
All right. Hi, guys. Thanks for having me. My name's Sabrina. I'm the Chief Public Affairs Officer for Berkeley Patients Group, and I've been a longtime activist. I used to work at Normal in Washington, D.C. for the early years of my adult life, and it has been quite an election. I think I'm still have a little bit of PTSD from 4 years ago, and just trying to be measuredly optimistic in what happens. But it's just been a really interesting election. I think first and foremost, drugs won the 2020 election. And I think it makes total sense. If ever there was a year that we needed drugs, it would be 2020. So let's keep that train going, because it's not going to stop now. But that aside, I think we're seeing a really interesting shift in the American electorate, and it's not entirely clear how that's shaking out right now. They're still counting a lot of votes in California and across the country. So, but it's obvious, given what we've seen in, some of these states that have legalized cannabis in very conservative areas, that they support adult use, but have also voted for very Republican lawmakers. And that has not traditionally been the case. And so figuring out, I'd love to come back and have this discussion in 2 months when all of the votes are in and we can analyze the data and the demographics of what's broken down. Anyway, I know Max will probably want to nerd out too. But, as of right now, I think that federally, we've got now with 2 states, South Dakota and Mississippi, legalizing some form of statewide regulatory cannabis. We've got 4 more senators, very Republican senators, that are going to be representing an industry in their state. And it's not right now, but people are, I'm sure, already sending them campaign contributions and getting ready to go into those states. And so they're going to have more meetings. There's going to be a lot more FaceTime that they're going to be forced to do now that these regulatory systems are going to have to be set up in that state, in both those states. So I think that's going to be very interesting to see where they come over. And that being said, I feel like if there's a Biden win, and hope to everything, and it's looking like the Republicans Senate majority, then, and the Democratic House, but looking at how the House is shaking out is also really interesting with the new electorate. I think something that everybody could probably agree on across all of those branches is a decriminalization sort of platform, probably safe banking, because that comes with another ally in the banking industry. But I think the MORE Act by another name would be something interesting to watch. I don't know if the Republicans would want to attach their name to the MORE Act, but as some mechanism that removes descheduling, which I know we want to have a conversation about too, but some mechanism where it leaves it up to the states, and the narrative is framed in a states' rights mechanism. In California, I think seeing what's happening in California, I've realized that the people like legalization in theory, And we see that in every state that's voted on it. But when it comes down to the nuances and the details, you start to see a divergence among the population. And when you bring into like NIMBYism and California has just been fascinating, and that has not all come in, but you know, there was one city that ran a ballot measure called, it was done by a group called Keep Cannabis Away from Kids Coalition Measure. And it was in Mount Shasta, and it lost, or it's losing, but I think it's going to lose completely, which is, first of all, it's terrifying that they're running measures, but I'm really glad that that community is smart enough to not fall for their propaganda. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out in San Diego and San Diego, excuse me, South Dakota. Last thing, I think a new Republican champion will come from a Republican that's up for re-election in 2020, probably from a state with a cannabis industry in it. And in terms of executive authority for descheduling, it depends who you ask. You know, I remember back when Obama was president, there were conversations on, you know, the drug reform level. People kept, you know, the administration said that they couldn't do it and it had to be Congress or the DEA, and each agency or place just kept referring it to the other group, and they're like, I can't do it, it has to be them. They said they can't do it. So I think anything's possible and people can get creative, and here we are in 2020 in the middle of a pandemic. So I think we'll find a pathway out, and this squeeze is sort of this, I think it's it's not a green wave, it's sort of like a green rising flood that's slowly flooding America in a good way. But I think that pressure is going to create some really interesting changes federally in the next couple of years.
Yeah, and then there's the UN vote in December. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Oh, hopeful. I know it's always they've tried. I'm not super on top of what exactly if it's the same thing that they've been debating every single year, and I see Jay Hong his head. That is not. It hasn't been successful. I feel like every year we're closer to success. So I don't think I'm in a position to comment on that particular area.
All right. Well, thank you for your thoughts. Stick around. We're going to come back. Nick, still, I need you to turn on your camera so that I can spotlight you. But for now, let's hear from Vince Ning. You just raised what? $5 million during a pandemic? What happened? Go.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for introducing me. My name's Vince. I'm the CEO of Nabis. We're one of the largest distribution companies in the state of California. You know, we ship over 100 different brands out to dispensaries across the state. So, you know, I think Susan wanted to bring me in for my perspective as an operator, particularly from the distribution lens in this sector of the supply chain, given how much we see of the market on a broad lens. And I think, you know, the amount of money that we raised and in particular also what we're seeing is this flood of new supply and brands entering the market and a lot of new product development speaks to the positive wave of sentiment in the cannabis industry, from not just, you know, capital providing perspective, but also from an operational and talent perspective, people leaving their, you know, full-time comfortable jobs, getting involved in the cannabis industry. And I think, you know, obviously the presidential election remains to yield a, you know, final conclusion, but, you know, Biden being ever so close to the 270 mark really bodes well. I mean, I am elated for everything that's going on with obviously all of the, you know, sweeping cannabis reform and legislation in so many states. I think there's sort of like three benefits that I see that immediately impact our market. You know, one, the sweeping winds of all the cannabis policy reforms will inevitably perpetuate cannabis as an essential business. I think we used to see cannabis as a essential business more of a privilege rather than a right. And I think, you know, as more states legalize, it will continue to swell up that sentiment. And also it helps further remove, I think, you know, it's been stated many times earlier in this conversation, helps further remove the stigma of cannabis, of the war on drugs brought forth. And I think it allows for a lot more talent to come into the industry. So I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that. And also, the innovations of product developments. I think lately we've seen a lot of interesting beverage companies, a lot of interesting condiments companies really start producing products at a larger scale. I think that just goes to show also that the consumer demographic has been widening its taste as well, and its ability to comprehend and understand more different product types, categories, and apply them in different facets of their own life that they go through. And so I think that is quite it's really positive for the industry. And then the second point I think is with further positive policy initiatives like the MORE Act and the Safe Banking Act, there's so many different ways and opportunities for cannabis to really gain its real footing from a financial institution perspective. And I think we keep talking about that, and I think at the bare bones level, what that'll provide us is eliminating the cash aspect of operations. From the time that I got into this industry several years ago till now, and many of you can speak to this as well. The cash was king. It was nearly 100% of all transactions that happened in the industry, and it creates additional security and compliance overhead, and along with 280E, really makes it hard for operators to run a profitable organization. And I think what stable, traditional, sound financial infrastructure will allow for is allows us to be able to operate at scale at a more sustainable rate. And I think the other side of the pressure cooker is, on the financial standpoint, it has been the inability for institutional capital to really enter the market due to various LP restrictions for investing into the cannabis industry, just because they see so much regulatory risk. And I think as that sort of stigma removes itself from the industry, and more states legalize medically, recreationally, it will allow for more of that institutional capital to really help grow the industry past the point it's at today. We just raised $5 million, but we really had to dig quite deep. We're coming on the other end of it, pretty happy with outcome. However, it was a grueling several months through COVID to really raise that amount of capital, and it wasn't clean. I had to go through and reach so many different family offices, angel investors, to really piece this together. And that's not the way. I come from the tech industry, and there's so many institutional VCs out there who could write a $5 million check on their own, and go back to bed in the afternoon not having thought about it twice. And I think in the cannabis industry that there's few and far between investors that can actually write that kind of check. And so I think as the industry continues to grow, and if we're really trying to support the size of the market, I think it's projected to be around like over $50 billion by 2025. We really need that capital to come in. And also investors will then be able to see potentially even the SEC allowing cannabis companies to list publicly. And that gives investors confidence too, that there's an exit opportunity. And so I think, that's my second point. I think the third point that I gleaned from the recent news and events is that ultimately what we all want is for the illicit market to be, to convert over to the legal cannabis market. And, ultimately, as much enforcement or, artificial means to, or regulatory means to really convert that market will definitely make, dents here and there, but ultimately it's the consumer's choice on whether or not they purchase products from the illicit market or the legal market. And I think what that comes down to is really just lowering prices for consumers. And I think, with all these new markets coming into the fold and potentially interstate commerce, legalizing, that will allow for more suppliers to enter the market, prices to drop for consumers, and ultimately, a smaller illicit market and a larger legal market. So I'm super excited to be here. I know we're coming up on time, and I want to leave some room for discussion for everyone else. But I do feel very fortunate to be part of this crowd and part of this period of sweeping reform in the cannabis industry. Thanks.
Well, Vince, I think you're right where you need to be. I mean, it may seem tough that you're piecing it together, but I believe that the wellness and nutraceutical industry is going to be the new tech for California. It's big. Also, I wanted to comment on your van behind you. Love that. Do you really drive that around with your name?
No, we don't.
Okay, because I was going to
It's just
say,
marketing material.
everybody was saying that we're going to have this big civil war this week. So have you had any safety issues or?
Yeah, no, we haven't had any issues per se, but we have staffed up quite aggressively, to say the least.
Yeah, I bet. Okay, great. Well, I'm going to put us all in the grid view, and I want to open it up to speakers that have questions for speakers. Any additional points that you want to make, just open up your mic and let's go, or raise your hand or whatever. Somebody wanted to know, Karen Woodson asked, does the National Governors Association have a cannabis caucus subcommittee? Does anybody know the answer to that? No, we don't know. Sorry, Karen.
Hey, Susan, can I make one comment on the Senate? One thing to remember in the Senate, that more than probably any other legislative body, committee chairs are all powerful. And Mike Crapo, who's been the banking chair, who's really held up the SAFE Act, it will no longer be chair. It's going to be most likely Pat Toomey from Pennsylvania, who hasn't really said a lot about cannabis, but when he was supportive of research a few years back. And so maybe that'll free things up. So I think it's really important to watch who the committee chairs coming in are, whether it's Democrat or Republican.
Let me speak to the UN issue. The UN vote is supposed to come up in December when Trump is still going to be president. And there's several issues actually that have been put forward by the WHO, the World Health Organization, for consideration by the member nations. The one of most interest is basically changing the scheduling of cannabis to recognize that, to free up the restrictions on medical use. Under the World Health Organization system, cannabis is currently in Schedule 4, which is equivalent to our Schedule 1. The only other drug that they have, that the UN has on that list now, I think, is heroin. So heroin and cannabis are together under this super tight control regime. The UN will be voting on removing it from Schedule 4. Now, they're talking about putting it, there's a couple of other schedules that they want to keep cannabis in, 2 and 3, one of those schedules would actually allow over-the-counter prescriptions, non-prescription sales in pharmacies, if you can envision that. Whether the UN is going to bite on that is a good question. There's also a matter on CBD, and the US delegation has made its position known that it actually favors the first proposition about removing cannabis from Schedule 4, which would seem to be inconsistent with our current scheduling regime of Schedule 1 in the United States. So should cannabis be removed from Schedule 4 in the UN, it's really indefensible for the DEA even to keep it in Schedule 1 in the United States. On the CBD resolutions, the US delegation is actually opposed for some technical reasons that have to do with the baroque way in which the DEA is trying to regulate hemp at the moment. But whether any of this goes through is really questionable, in my opinion, because you're going to have Russia and China and a host of African countries and a host of Middle Eastern countries are going to be very much against all of this. So without really strong US leadership, which I don't think this country has at the moment, I will be pleasantly surprised if this goes through. But the scheduling of cannabis at the international level is a really important issue, and it will be up in December.
Thank you, Dale. I'd like to maybe add to that or follow that up with maybe a question for the group, for those of you who are actively working, in the industry, like Sabrina or Frenchie or Vince. No other industry relies so heavily on lab testing as a backstop. But there probably are a lot of other preventative measures that could be taken at the level of the operation to reduce this over reliance on lab testing. If you guys had any comments on that, we'd like to share.
How can you be over reliant on lab tests? The only really positive aspect of legalization is to really be able to put a product on the market that is clean. Even for our farmer, some products they were using, they had no idea that they were toxic.
Labs can't test for everything though. And
Yeah,
GMP and other good practices are really needed to be adopted by the industry. Just like with wine, they don't test for every bottle of, Bordeaux isn't tested for lead.
Yes, but Bordeaux, before being put in bottle, it's an appellation contrôlée. The control over everything is unreal because they control the qualities. There is a dedication to qualities that cannot be broken. So
yeah,
the
good
standardization
practices
over it is way beyond science at that level. In cannabis, because cannabis is also therapeutic, it's not also pleasurable, then putting science in the middle helps a lot. For me, as a hash maker, because I have to go through lab tests, I know much better my product.
Yeah, of course. It's just not, I just don't believe it's the end all be all of product safety. I think, we have GMP experts who are watching this right now.
But no, because people can buy out the lab to put their test positive. Sure, it's not.
And I'm not arguing with you over the validity of lab testing at all. I'm just saying they can't test for everything. People lab shop, people alter their samples before submitting it to the lab. It's a really terrible game that people are playing with labs. But folks like you're straightforward. You know the value of it. But Karen, sorry, please.
Oh, yeah, I just thought I'd chime in. I heard a podcast recently from Weed Wonks, and they had a fascinating new service that some of you probably are aware of, which was cannabis decontamination from Willow Industries, which might not completely replace lab testing, but it seemed like a nice additional, it's more akin to pasteurization and can get rid of microbes and some of the other contaminants, molds, for all of the cannabis. And what Jordan Wellington from Vicente Steterberg, who hosts Weed Wonks, was saying is that this is much more similar to what the federal government requires for all other products, to have some kind of proactive cleaning of the product to make sure that it's safe. So perhaps from what they were saying, they know a lot more about it than I do, you could have less lab testing and more of the cleaning of products.
Wow. Hardware and storage are also very important. Jehan, you were the first person who ever told me about vape pens and metal being bad back in, 2013 or 2014. I'd never even heard about that. And like hardware has been one of the parts of the problem with the vape crisis. So having some sort of regulatory structure around the kind of metals that you can use.
Let me say one place where I think we can actually make some progress possibly in Congress is on research issue in general. This whole thing about the Schedule I restrictions on what kind of cannabis labs are allowed to tell, or anybody's able to use, and restrictions on DEA licensed labs and what they're allowed to use. It's totally nonsensical and obsolescent. And even the heads of FDA and NIDA say that that should be done away with. I think a research bill to clean that up, something that we were working on in Cal Normal for a couple of years. In fact, we're talking to Congressman Correa's staff about it. Finally, a bill actually, I think, got written up just in the last couple months, and might be available next year. But I think we've just got to get the DEA's control over what labs can get their hands on and test. We got to take that away, and not just for cannabis, frankly, I think for all drugs. So not that I see that happening, but I think we can get it for cannabis.
Awesome. I know, Eric, you wanted to say something earlier. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, just totally agree with Frenchie about appellations. I think the state's done a really good job of creating an appellation program where if you're going to create an appellation, it's got to be outdoor, sun-grown, full-term cannabis. I would say that while it is true that the Triangle is the most premier region in California, it's not the only one. We've been growing cannabis in Lake County for 30 years as well, and do very well there. So just like there's not just Bordeaux, there's Burgundy and there's Loire, and there's a dozen other really good regions, and more than Napa in California. I think there'll be a lot of great regions in California that evolve as really important places to grow.
They will, but it all started with Bordeaux, because Bordeaux had a world reputation for quality before anyone. Then the other region did the same. That's what I mean here in California. No one, my friend, no one has a world reputation in California. It's only the Emerald Triangle. It's not even Humboldt Trinity of Mendocino. It's the Emerald Triangle that everybody knows the name around. I know you'd like to have Lake County part of it, and you're all welcome to it. But if you don't support the quality, the heritage that the EP gave you in the Emerald Triangle, you lose it all. I want you to be really conscious about it. It's like the future of the cannabis industry literally is on the shoulder of those people that you are basically chasing away because they cannot afford legalization even if they wanted it. So without the support of the states and the government, you will lose everything that has been created. It's unreal because you have much more than Bordeaux ever had in the end of the 1800s, much more. And there is a blueprint in a history book how to make it happen, actually.
Adam, I see you shaking your head. What's up?
Actually, I apologize for shaking my head. Mickey Norris texted me and I haven't spoken to her in 6 months, and she was saying something about the panel and she made me smile.
Okay.
So I apologize. I didn't mean to. But I also but she was saying to me that she likes that I smile when Frenchie's talking, and I told her Frenchie makes me smile. And so that's essentially what just happened.
Who doesn't love Frenchie? He's the best. We love you, Frenchie. Okay, well, some people have their hands up, but we're almost on time. I want to let's end on a super positive note, because what won in 2020? Drugs, right? Yay, yay. So hopefully Oregon's gonna set the standard, and the use is gonna be very responsible and scientific and wonderful, and everything's gonna be great. But if anyone has any final comments that are positive and what we need to do moving forward, I'd love to hear from you really smart people.
Stay healthy. Stay strong.
Go, Sabrina.
Breathe.
Yeah, breathe.
Inhale.
Inhale cannabis.
Interstate commerce.
Connect. We need to connect together to stay together.
Amen. Amen. I'm going to do a Unity conference in January. We're gonna try it again.
Can I say I do have one last thing. Even if the Senate ends up Republican, keep in mind, I think, and the last year has really shown me this, that the governors are our best political allies. The governors of states that have legalized have a real incentive to make sure that these industries work. Some of them, live that out better than others. But as we look at federal legalization, keep remembering that federal legalization does not change a single state law, right? They can, 100 years after federal legalization, they can still put you in jail for 10 years for an ounce of cannabis in Idaho if they want to do that, right? go, let's, the governors seem to be, I mean, obviously we need to push federally. I'm not saying we shouldn't do that, but the governors are the key to cannabis reform. And the governors are the ones who will have more impact at the federal level as they ask for the reforms that we need, particularly before we get Democrats in control of everything.
And I guess this is just a last mind munchie or food for thought for you all. Remember, there's still a lot to be discovered about the cannabis plant. There's still new cannabinoids on this plant that are being discovered. Some are sitting at the University of Mississippi and just waiting for a grad student to characterize them. We don't even know what they do. So if you're an industry member watching this, you might be having a vat of oil there with some undiscovered cannabinoid with tremendous potential. So please keep your eyes and ears and mind open for the next big discovery with this plant.
Thank you. Yes. And get a hold of the good doctor. Everyone put your contact information if you want in the chat. We're at 6 o'clock. Thank you so much. I really respect and admire each and every one of you and all that you've done. Keep up the good work. Thank you so much for participating. I love you. I can't wait till we can be together again in person. Hopefully on the Queen Mary Jane in Long Beach. Yay. Thanks you so much.
Thank you, Susan.
I'm going to do my best to get this video uploaded to YouTube in the morning because it's so timely and so amazing. And then we can all push it out to the people that were not able to attend today. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Yay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Good night.